Since we weren't together last Wednesday, a little bit of a review. Last time we were in our divine drama, Naomi had just given Ruth a very unique plan that she wanted her to follow. She told Ruth that Boaz was going to be winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So if you look at verse 3, she said to her, "Wash and anoint yourself." And we noted that in that day, people didn't take baths as much as we do. Definitely didn't wash up every day. Most teenagers would have loved it to live in that day. Usually once a week was maybe good. So they used perfumes and oils to cover up smells, especially in the heat of that whole place where ancient Near East. And so she tells her, get the oil on you, get new clothes on or clean clothes. And so Naomi tells her to go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man. These requests seem oddly specific. Do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Things get really interesting in verse 4. Naomi says, but when he lies down, watch the place or observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. So since none of us courted or dated with those gestures, we knew that it's a kind of a nonverbal, customary way. Back then, that's how they requested marriage. So we're clued into that when Naomi says, he will tell you what to do. Instead of, if it would be us, we'd say, I don't know what you're doing right now. This seems really weird. So we know, according to his character, so far in the story, Boaz is a man that Ruth and that Naomi trust, because Ruth right away says, all that you say I will do. And she immediately models that continual servant's heart she's had for her mother-in-law. She doesn't raise any questions. She doesn't give any objections. She might not understand what some of these gestures were about. We don't know the Moabites versus the Israelites. So verse 6 tells us that she went down to the threshing floor. She did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. So as we were closing up, we were wondering, well, how is this going to end up? If we're hearing this story for the first time, is Naomi's plan going to work? Is Boaz going to pick up on the hints here? So we look at verse 7 tonight, and when Boaz had eaten and drunk, that's the way it's interpreted. I would feel like drank was a better way to say it, but oh well. Eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry. Interesting phrase. He went down to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. He separates himself from his workers. That phrase, his heart was merry, is literally his heart was good. He was in a good place. And when that Hebrew phrase is used in the Old Testament, it's used for a feeling of euphoria. And that could be the result of many things. The opposite of that feeling we know in Hebrew is depression. So he's the opposite of depression and grief. In a number of other passages where this phrase shows up, the state of well-being is brought on by eating and drinking. So he's full. It doesn't necessarily mean the wine's kicking in and he's feeling a buzz. It just means maybe he's satisfied. Everything's going good with the threshing. He's just in a good place. He's very mellow. And then he went to lie down. So he's going to lie down and sleep. They didn't have time to surf the internet or check their phones then, nor did they have the technology. So he's not going to be aware of Ruth's arrival, which kind of builds up the suspense. So he lies down at the end of the heap of grain. And this, I think, is a way that God sets things up so that Ruth can approach him in a very safe way. If he's just lying around with his buddies, it's going to be hard for her to maneuver and do these things. They don't have light. How's she going to know which one he is? She ends up proposing to the wrong guy. So he drifts off to sleep, and I bet you could hear Ruth's heart pounding in the quiet. And verse 7, the end, then she came softly, and that word can mean quietly or secretly, either way would work here. She came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. So far, she is sticking to the plan. And she doesn't want to disturb him. So the writer is dramatically bringing Ruth and Boaz together here. Very unusual circumstances. Here they are together at night. They're probably alone. They're on the very non-romantic threshing floor. And Ruth has executed Naomi's plan to a T. So what's going to happen? Now, have you ever been startled awake? I guess it depends where you are in your dream cycle. I was always told, I'm a very vivid dreamer to this day, but I was a sleepwalker. And my mom, it had to be so weird. She said, I just had this sixth sense whenever you were up as a little boy. And she said, I'd be up, we had a big, looking glass window, just staring out of it. That's so creepy to me to, hello? And she said, I didn't want to wake you up. We were told, don't wake up a sleepwalker, just guide you back to bed. And other things, I did worse things in my sleep, my sisters have told me about, and they swear to this day I was awake, but I was asleep. At least I'm claiming that now. So what happens when she does this? At midnight, the man was startled, and interestingly, that word means he woke up with a shudder. Like, ooh. I think he probably did because she uncovered what? His legs. And it's nighttime, it's colder, and he's probably startled by the chill of the midnight air on those legs. And I love this. And he turned over, and behold, well, what do you know? A woman is laying at his feet. He doesn't know it's Ruth. How do you think he knows it's a woman? Because he's not probably able to see real well. She doesn't smell like a dude. None of the guys that he's been around after working all day, she smells nice. So he's pretty sure this is a woman at his feet. And I love the way the narrator keeps using, instead of their names of Boaz and Ruth, he keeps saying the man, the woman, the man. It's almost like he's tapping us on the shoulder and reminding us, hey, this is a guy. This is a man. He's an upright Israelite, but he's a male who has found himself in this secluded place on the threshing floor with the opposite of a male. No gender confusion back then. This is a woman, and she's lying in front of him. She might be beside him or in front of him. We don't know for sure. But there's just this tension, because what's Boaz going to think, first of all, and then what's he going to say? I think the first thing, it depends on how his dreaming life goes. Is this a dream? This seems very vivid. And maybe he thought he had a little too much wine at dinner. We don't know about that. But he has to be wondering what in the world is going on. And again, depending on who you wake up, some people don't wake up in great moods, especially if you scare them. I don't think most people do. So he doesn't come out swinging, thank God. He says in verse 9, who are you? And we don't know what his tone is, And who might you be, ma'am? I think he's bothered, at least, startled, he's surprised, he's uneasy, maybe a little bit fearful at this point, because he is an upright man, and there's a woman at his feet. But remember what Naomi said to Ruth. This is key. Go and uncover his feet and lie down, and what's next? He'll tell you what to do. Okay, so is that what happened? No, I love that. She uncovers his feet, and he asks her a startling question. Who are you? And maybe Ruth's thinking, Naomi, you didn't give me a plan B. I got to, adapt and change here. Got to think on the fly. So he says to her, Ruth then answers, I am Ruth, your servant. Now, that's a key word there for servant, and it's the word handmaid. And it doesn't sound like maybe even we would hear it. There's a show on TV, The Handmaid's Tales. It's nothing like that. It was different from the word that maybe how we've heard it. The word that would be beneath that in society would be if she said, Ruth, I am your maidservant. And here's the difference. She's using the word handmaid here to refer to herself in a socially higher term. It stressed that word did feminine qualities in this era in need of being protected. It implied weakness, even sexual attraction. The word she may have been expected to use, maidservant, was used when a female was thought of as kind of like a possession, like a common laborer. So the word that Ruth uses, she kicks herself up a notch. She's got a good self-respect. And she is using a word that a woman maybe of high rank who is married to a man of wealth might use this kind of word. She is leaving out, thank God, we've been reminded almost every time, Ruth, the Moabitess. Remember where she's from? Yeah, we got it, Moab. She's speaking as a full-fledged Bethlehemite. I'm from Bethlehem here. So by saying that she's a handmaid, she's implying her improved status. She's no longer a lower-class servant. Rather, here's the key, she is eligible for marriage. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So, Ruth, you need to be quiet and let Boaz talk. Remember what Naomi said. He'll tell you what to do. Ruth is really off script now. She says to Boaz, as she keeps going, spread your wings. That is the Hebrew word kanaf. And that word has two meanings. It can mean wings, or it can mean the skirt of a garment. And in this instance, that's what she's saying. The corner of Boaz's garment. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So that phrase, to cover with the garment, is not a request because Ruth's saying, hey, I'm a little cold here too, warm me up. No, it has two different nuances that are important. First of all, it could be taken as a general plea for protection. If you remember all the way back in chapter 2, verse 2, Boaz uses that word wing. And he's speaking of God's wings under which Ruth would seek refuge. So in a sense, Ruth is inviting Boaz to be the answer to his prayer here. Provide some measure of full reward, of refuge under God's wings through this action by marrying me. And that leads us to the second nuance of that word kanap, which is, it's in that culture, it meant to spread the hem of one's garment over a woman, and it was kind of used as a ceremonial covering of a bride's head by the husband. This was in this part of the world. It's still used by some Arab cultures. It's a marriage custom where a man symbolically takes a wife by throwing a corner of his garment over her. And this gesture symbolized his protection over her and his readiness for sexual consummation. So this is getting a little bit intimate here, but nothing inappropriate yet, or ever, because these are both great people. The meaning of the expression is made very clear if you want to turn over to the book of Ezekiel so we can get a sense of how powerful this expression is. Ezekiel 16. I'm going to read verses 7 and 8. In this context, Yahweh, God, is talking about his bride, Israel. He is the bridegroom, she's the bride. That's used a lot of God and his bride, Israel. And it's very explicit language. He says in verse 7 of Ezekiel 16, I made you, talking to Israel, I made you flourish like a plant of the field, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed and your hair had grown, yet you were naked and bare. Why does he say that? Verse 8, when I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age of love. And I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered up your nakedness. And I made a vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. So Ruth is being very clear about her desire to marry Boaz. So look at verse 10, because we don't know how this guy is going to respond. I imagine in that culture, I don't know for sure, but usually the men would ask the women, but she's putting things in a different gear. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. Oh, great. That's it being called my friend. No, he's not friend zoning her. He doesn't seem affected by or offended by her directness. He seems to be flattered and pleased by it. By mentioning the Lord, Boaz is implying that he knew the Lord had something to do with all this. And he then says this, you have made this last, this is huge, you have made this last kindness, what you just did, greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. What was the first kindness that Boaz pointed out when she was gleaning, when he first met her? What kindness did he refer to her as having to do with what? You got Ruth and Orpah. They're crying, we don't want to say goodbye to you, Naomi. Naomi's like, go on, get. And Orpah says, okay, I'll obey you. And stubborn Ruth says, nope, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. So by the time she gets onto those gleaning fields, Boaz says, you're in essence, your character is already known. Your reputation has preceded you. Why? Because you have chosen to do something amazing, and that's take care of your mother-in-law. You didn't have to do that. You could stay back in Moab. So he's telling her that what she just did to him on that threshing floor is even greater act of kindness. Now, why would he say that? Well, some of it has to do with that phrase there, you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. He's telling her something really big here. There's two different things he points out that she could be doing. Now, we're never told, I always assume Ruth is beautiful, but we're never told, unless I'm missing something later in the story, about her beauty. What women are we told are beautiful in the Old Testament? What women are told they're gorgeous? There's a few of them you should know. Esther, yep. Remember early on, these ladies were so gorgeous that their husband lied? Sarah and Rebecca. Why did their husbands, when they were asked, who are they? Oh, this is my sister. Why would they lie about that? Most men are very proud to have a gorgeous wife. What was the problem? Yeah, she's so good looking, we're going to bump you off and take her for our own. And so I can't remember if it's Sarah. Well, both times when they find out, they're horrified, the people. Like, why didn't you tell me this was your wife? And, well, I feared you'd kill me. But we're never told that Ruth is beautiful. I'm assuming she's an attractive young woman because, and it doesn't have to be that way, but early on, the way Boaz is treating her is his attraction to her. But maybe he's one of those guys that's just like, her character is phenomenal. I want to get to know more about her. We don't know. But what he's saying to her is, first of all, you could have gone after young men. So, not to place myself, I don't know how old Boaz here. I'm going to guess, let's say mid-50s. I'm 57. So a girl in her 20s. This is probably late 20s is Ruth. The first thing he's saying to her is, there's a lot of guys your age that are handsome and run faster than me, that are good-looking guys, hard-working, they have a future ahead of them. You could have gone after them, and you'd have been totally fine doing so. That's number one. But then, basically, in our terminology, he said you could have been a gold digger. You could have gone after guys who are rich. Now, Boaz isn't poor, right? But Boaz is saying there's people out there that, men that are single that got a lot of money, even compared to him. So he says, you're not going after men your own age. You're not making yourself available as a bride as a person that just wants money. You're doing it because of what? What is she trying to do here? She's trying to keep this, and this goes against our culture, so kind of in the family, right? The kinsman redeemer. It's going to be in the line of Elimelech, her late husband. So right away, he's giving her those props and saying, hey, look, you're choosing family loyalty over everything else. You're considering your own happiness as secondary to providing security for your mother-in-law. This is even greater than the first act, because now you're looking to the long-term solution of making a permanent bond to Naomi, her place and people, through marrying me. And I think about, in a much greater way, we think of someone like Ruth as a servant, as a person that's putting her desires and wants, they're on the back burner. She is a woman of character that wants to do the best for her family. She's leaving her own place, her own country, her people, and she's in this foreign land, but she's also taking a guy that's not in her generation. I just think, the greatest example we get in Philippians 2, that beautiful Christ hymn of Jesus leaving heaven, giving up all that was, and taking upon himself, not just joining himself to man, but taking on himself the form of a what? Servant. And being found as a servant, he does the most amazing thing is he humbles himself. Theologians call Jesus' coming to earth his humiliation. So Jesus' humiliation isn't just joining himself to us, and that would be enough of your God. But his humiliation is making yourself servant, but not just by becoming a man, but by doing what? You're giving yourself to die, but even death on the cross, like we said Sunday, the most horrific death there is. So just thinking about the parallels I think that we can think of here in this woman of amazing character. So notice what Boaz says next in verse 11. And now, my daughter, do not fear. So why do you think, or what do you think are some reasons that Boaz is telling her don't be afraid? Put yourself in her place. And I'm not looking for just one. But what are some things that she's stepping out on here and could be fearful of? You would reject her. That's the biggest, I think. To put it in very real terminology, the threshing floor was no place for a young single woman. And so he immediately tells her, don't be afraid, because see, Boaz, if he wasn't a man of character, not only would reject her, but he could have treated her as the Israelites thought of, like Moabite trash. Here comes this trash into our country, corrupting my people here with whatever, and I want you away from me. I don't know what you're thinking, but Boaz, the opposite, shows her true chesed, that kindness, by treating her as a woman equal to him in status and character. Don't be afraid. Verse 11, I will do for you all that you ask. Yay! Wedding bells are ringing. This is great. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. So Boaz describes her as a worthy woman. And I love that phrase because that exact Hebrew phrase is found in a very popular chapter in the book of Proverbs. Do you have a guess of a woman who is a very worthy woman in Proverbs? Proverbs 31. So, to save us some time here, I was looking through Proverbs 31, and I'll never forget, just as a sidebar, it was Mother's Day, and as a pastor, and you've been in a church for a while, what do you do with the days of Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas Day, Easter? And I always believed it was important to do something addressing that day. If it was Father's Day, it was my chance to talk, especially to the men and young men. Women, you can listen, and vice versa. So we had this sweet lady in our church, brilliant. She was just a brilliant mind and not given to emotion much. She was one of our musicians, and I came out of my office before the Sunday sermon, She was more of a quiet person, and she's crying. One of the other ladies on the worship team's kind of patting her on the shoulder. And the woman that was patting her on the shoulder said she's having a tough day, Mother's Day. Now, she has 2 amazing daughters, so I don't know what was going on in her life. It could have been her relationship with her mom. I don't know. I'll never forget. She said, I just feel awful. She goes, the worst thing I could ever hear, and she did not know, is that it'd be so bad that if you preached on Proverbs 31. I said, well, I have really bad news. And she just burst out in tears. I've never had anybody burst out in tears when I told them the passage I was going to preach. Tears of sadness or joy. She was just having a tough day. And what I remember, I thought right away is some women, when they hear Proverbs 31, is like, great. I'm not going to match up to this. If you're done with Proverbs 31, you read through it, this is the perfect lady in every way. She wears me out by reading about her. But it's kind of like the spiritual gifts. When you look at them, we're to see that we're not supposed to have them all. So Proverbs 31 isn't saying, fellas, look for a girl who does all of these things and does them perfectly. Well, if he does, she doesn't exist. But he's giving you these character traits. And I look at Ruth, first of all, the Proverbs 31, Ruth, she's trustworthy, she's industrious, she's shrewd, she's very generous to the needy, and she's efficient. So she's knocking it out of the park with at least 5 of those character traits that we know of in Proverbs 31. And let me say one more thing before we leave verse 11. It's easy to imagine from what we know so far out of Boaz that he would be looking for a woman of godly character. Now, I don't know why he was single at this point. We don't know if he lost his wife or if he just was very picky. But it's just important to understand that so many of the key traits of the worthy woman in Proverbs 13 are recognizable in Ruth apart from marriage. Now, Paul even talks about some people are given what he would call the gift of singleness or celibacy. And there are some people, I've met a few, especially guys that just, I remember one, a friend of mine, he's a professor in a seminary, and he just was single all through college. We went together to college, and by the time I got my MDiv in 4 years, he had gotten his MDiv and an MTS, and then he was working on his PhD, and he's just, you knew he was going to be a PhD. I mean, he's just brilliant. And we always kind of joked with him because we got to get you a girl. And he didn't, if you saw him and thought of the typical professor, that's him. And I won't go into too many details in case he ever watches this, but he didn't care about his hair being combed or looking, just so. He was just focused on learning God's word. He knew he was going to teach in a college or seminary. So he comes back to Greenville from California, where he's teaching a lot. And one of our close friends who pastors North Hills Church there in Greenville, very large church, he'll teach there sometimes, my friend. And there was this woman in North Hills that just loved him. And I never met her, but my sister-in-law who goes there said, you just would be shocked. You kind of be like, you love him. I almost said his name. And she's like, I love him and I want to marry him. He's never really been interested in marriage. And here's this girl kind of doing her own Ruth. Hey, Michael, I just said his name. Anyway, very interested. And this was the ultimate test for him because he still said, hey, that's so sweet of you, but God's called me to be single. And we're like, ugh, okay, I hope you're sure of that because this is an awesome offer here. So we don't know if Boaz, why he's single here. But it's easy for women to think, unless I am married, have children, even in Proverbs 31, there's the presupposition of wealth, then I'm not really a great woman. And there are plenty of women that will never get married, plenty of women that won't have children, and we want to make sure in the Church of Jesus Christ they are made to feel as equal and as great as marriage. In some places, women are kind of looked down, and men too, for being, You've never married? What's going on with you? And so Ruth didn't have to be married to Boaz to fulfill all these godly character traits. And she's already been married once before. Ruth can be this simple young woman that's fully qualified to marry Boaz. They're a great match, but she's worthy apart from Boaz because she loves God, her new God that she's been serving now faithfully. In verse 12, he says, "And now it is true that I am a redeemer." Wedding bells get louder. There's that word, the next word, yet, or but, there is a redeemer nearer than I. There's a glitch into this thing, them getting hitched this evening. Boaz is a man of great character, and there is, as at this point, an unnamed relative, we'll get into this soon in the story, who is standing in a closer kinship relationship to Elimelech than Boaz. And that he had actually the prior right to be her Goel, her kinsman redeemer. So in Israelite custom, the duty fell upon the closest male relative, but he could waive his right. But it fell on him first. He was, it sounds kind of weird, but first dibs to this guy. And Boaz knows this. Boaz is an upright Israelite. And we have this suspense now that's even heightened in the story because we were just ready to see these guys get married and start having kids and let's get this heir going, but not so fast. Now the question is, did Naomi, was she trying to do a roundabout here? Did she know that there was a kinsman that was closer to Ruth than Boaz? Well, I think there's a possibility she may have been unaware of that relative's place in line. Or she may have approached Boaz simply because in her thinking, he was a guy that was more likely to take action than the other kinsman, which we'll hint, find out to be soon to be true. So we don't know. I don't think Naomi's trying to work around here. I think she's godly in this too, trying to do the right thing, and Boaz kind of puts the brakes on everything. Verse 13, "Remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good." I don't know. I wonder if Boaz really had mixed feelings when he said that. Good. Let him do it. "But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." Now, why does he tell her to lie down until the morning? We both know these are people of character. There's nothing going on sexually here. A couple of things might be happening. One is that it's not a safe place to be running around as a single woman in that part where she is, and he wants to protect her. He may want to spend some extra time with her talking. We don't know. But there's another possibility, is I think Boaz is probably trying to protect her reputation. If she's seen leaving a tent where men are, where Boaz is, people might interpret her midnight presence as that of a prostitute to a customer. Winnowing was ordinarily men's work, so we don't know what he was doing with this, but we do know that it's for good reasons. And I like that he doesn't say, "If he will marry you, good, let him do it." He uses kinsman terminology here. He's letting us know that there may be more to this process than simply marrying her. But he then gives her a vow, "As the Lord lives." He's swearing an oath. "I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to be loyal to you, Ruth." So Boaz and Ruth are not officially engaged. They've not done any signing up on, what do you call that, where people put, I wish they had this in our day, when you have your, what do you call that, when a married couple wants, they have a list of things they'd like? Registration. They didn't have that back in the 80s when I was getting married, so you got at least 2 or 3 toasters, and you had one to give at some other party when you were giving gifts, but so there's none of that going on, no excitement that way. This is a righteous man, And he says, lay it. So she does what he says. She lay at his feet, verse 14, until the morning. But she got up, she arose before anyone could recognize her. She leaves at a very good time. And verse 14 at the end, and he said, let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So this is Boaz doing some self-talk here. He doesn't want to feed the fire of town gossips who would love to have a field day with this scene. Why? I told you so. She's a seductive woman. All those Moabite women are seductive. And that kind, elderly Israelite man shows her a bit of kindness, and she takes advantage of him. And no, he's not going to fuel those flames at all. So at the risk of sending Ruth back to Moab and seeing Boaz penalized for even looking like he was going to break the law, great precautions are being taken. Verse 15, and he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out. And he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. Now, it's difficult to determine the exact measurement of barley here, but a lot of people think he's loading this into her shawl. And one person wrote that this is probably 60 to 100 pounds. I'm like, Ruth she's in shape. Good gracious. You dump 60 to 100 pounds, and any of us would be like, I can't make it very far. But he is giving her this grain for 2 reasons. One, he's taking care of her and Naomi. But there's another reason. I think he wanted to provide an explanation that would head off any scandalous misunderstandings of her pre-dawn return. Anyone else seeing Ruth leaving with so much barley would maybe think, man, this is a woman that's trying to stay away from poverty. She's working overtime to make the most out of the harvest. Now, we're at the end of this story, this part of the story. Who do you think has been on pins and needles this whole time? Naomi. She probably hasn't slept a wink at night. She's going back and forth. How is this thing going? And we'll have to see that next week. But I imagine that a lot of what Naomi was doing was praying. And that's about all we can do in those instances, isn't it? Let's just pray to God, help. But it is amazing because I think sometimes when it looks like things are lining up and a prayer is being answered, and then there's just another wait from God. Not yet. And again, we know how this ends if we've read the story, but they don't. And it could be very tempting for Ruth to be deflated here. She may have struggled with his feelings. She set on Boaz. Who in the world is this other guy? But he has legal rights. It's a whole different culture than you and I live in. So has anyone ever known anybody that came from a culture and got married because it was their parents, selected the mate? Have you ever met anybody from that type of culture? Indian culture is one where it's very popular. And we had a woman in our church that was studying in the States. She's from India, studying to be a doctor. And she met another doctor, and he's as white as I am, and she's very much Indian. And so they had to get through this whole thing of the parents are all set on picking out the right person. I don't know. I mean, I love my parents a lot, and they're great people. They may have done really well. Who knows? But I don't really like that type of arranged marriage thing. I don't know. This is like even a step beyond arranged marriage to like who's the higher bidder, it feels like here. It's got to be hard for Ruth. I don't know how much of this was similar to the Moabite culture or how much of it is just foreign, but you never ever hear Ruth saying, hey, look, you're both giving me things to do and things to say. Anybody want to know what I want here? Anybody think that I have a will? No, she's doing what is right. She's trying to follow and do the right thing. But I would love to, one day in heaven, we'll find out things they were thinking. Anyway, well, we'll come back next week, and we'll pick up verse 16 then. Let's close in prayer. God, thank you so much for giving us the gift of this book. Thank you. As we know in the Bible, there are stories that Jesus told that were rooted in culture, but were just that, stories, parables. to teach truth, but this is one that is placed in God's Word that is true, that really happened. It wasn't written as some sort of poem or poetry to help us understand something deeper. These are people that are all trying their best to serve you. And this is a woman, this Ruth, that is in a different place, and she's without her husband, and she's trying to do the right thing, and she's trying to serve you as her new God. And God, we just look at her sincerity, her integrity, and it really is somebody that I would want to be like. That when you say, I want you to do this, that we don't argue, that we don't complain. And that can mean just starting our day off. Lord, as you know, I did even yesterday, just talking to you and just feeling dread in my heart, and there's no need for dread. And so it's so easy for sometimes our spirits to feel off, and yet you want us to steer toward gratitude. What's in front of us now? What can we be grateful for? What do you want us to do now? And thank you that we're seeing that model for us in both of these people. And looking forward to unpacking more of it when we get together next Wednesday. We ask all this in Jesus' name.